If you're tuning in, this is our Word on Wednesday, which is our Bible study series, our teaching series. And I hope that you've had a good day and somehow that you have gotten some rest on this day. So I asked you to tune in to us and invite some people to join us. If you have a phone, an Apple phone, you can go down to the share and you can push on send in messenger and you can invite some folks to join us. So why don't you just take the opportunity to do that wherever you are. And if you have an Apple product, if you have one of those other phones, then I guess you'll go down to me. Good evening, Elder Jackie. Good to see you. How was your day? Tell me how your day was. Did you have a good day? Was it a challenging day? And hopefully you had a good day and a safe day. So take the opportunity to invite some people. As I said, you go down to the bottom of your phone. If you have a cell phone and even an iPad, and if you have one of those other phones, good to see you. Oh, Lorraine Sims, good to see you. Thank you for joining us tonight. It's good to see. Hope you've had a good day. And I was your professor where? So you have to remind me. Was it in Atlanta? Because it's been a long time, so I'm glad to have you on. But please tell me where you're from. Please tell me where you're from and where you are, where you know me from. But I'm glad to have you. And so as you're getting settled in, you can go down to the bottom of your phone. I said if you have a cell phone or if you're on an iPad, you just go down to the bottom where it says share, and then you can go into various things to invite folks. If you go to share, then you can go to your send a message. Oh, Beulah Heights. Oh my God, that's such a long time ago. Glad to have you. You have to send me a note and let me know how you found me. But I'm glad to have you, and I hope you enjoy our study tonight. You know, if you had me as a professor, you kind of know who I am in a sense. So it's good to have you. So I asked you to get your favorite beverage because our Bible study doesn't last long. It's about 30 minutes. And so we ask that you get comfortable, get something to write with. And now if you have a cell phone or iPad, you can go down to where it says share and go to your send to your messenger page, and then you can send off messages to invite all of your friends. I have a ton of them, but I try to invite as many as I can, and hopefully some of them will show up. So take the opportunity to do that now, and I'm just so glad to have you. And listen, while you're doing that, get your Bible or electronic Bible. We're going through the book of Esther. The book of Esther. We're in chapter 2 tonight. The book of Esther. And I'm basically dealing with, and I had a couple thoughts running around in my head as I was preparing today in terms of, and we'll get into that, but the book of Esther, chapter 2, and we're going to particularly today, we'll be looking at verses 1 through 11, and just discovering how the story is sort of changing and turning now. So while you're inviting some people, and I'm doing the same thing, do that, take a few minutes, get settled in, and then we'll get started here in a few minutes. And it's so good to have all of you. And don't forget, we have service on Sunday at 9 a.m. live, and I ran the service twice last week. I may do that again this week. I did it at 9 and I did it at 11. Also, don't forget our Palm Sunday service will be a drive-up service. So you'll be in your car. We may have some chairs outside. We'll have communion. We'll have some fun stuff, things we'll have for the kids. And so, we invite you to come to that Palm Sunday service. Make sure you bring your mask, and we'll have a wonderful time. All right. Yes, Book of Esther. Wow, that's good to hear. Sister Sims, this is the book that I accepted my calling from. Wow. Oh, I'm one of your favorite professors. That's good, man. You're gonna have to inbox me at the end. I appreciate that. And listen, and if y'all have any questions when I'm going through, you can put it right there on that feed line where it says comments, and I will definitely try to deal with your questions if I miss them, or you can inbox me as well. So, but while we're on live, you can just comment, and I'll see some of them and put them up. So, yeah, I'm putting you up on the screen. Oh, now, okay, your face looks very familiar now that I see you. Okay, Lurleen. Wow, that's been some time. Okay, so let's get started. We're going to pray first, and then we're going to just jump in here. God, thank you for this day. Thank you for an opportunity to study your word. Not just for study's sakes, but hopefully we can find nuggets, find principles, find the truth in your word that can help us to live life here on this earth, to navigate in situations that sometimes are difficult. We pray for our hearing and our understanding. We thank you for everyone who will be a part of this study, whether they're here now or they'll listen to it at some other point. This is my prayer in your son's name, Yeshua. Amen. All right. So, Book of Esther is a very powerful book. And I think this is the first time I've ever really taught from it. And I didn't realize, I believe as God's Spirit has been leading me to these books, particularly as they deal with what is called exilic experiences. That just simply means that people, particularly the Hebrew people later on who were named Jews or Jewish, and that's a whole nother conversation. But they always seem to be telling their stories out of these exilic, these existence or these experiences in exile. And really, what I think is, and the reason why I think that these, particularly this book and the stories, resonate with me so much, and probably you too as well, is because we've been, as African people of African descent, we've been in this country for some 400 years, and it just seems like, even though we have what I call a modicum of freedom, because every time you turn around, it seems like our freedoms are being threatened, whether it's voter suppression or whether it's police brutality or the justice system that's not just, or just a number of things we probably can name off. And it doesn't mean that some of us are not learning how to survive and even thrive in some ways in an empire. But as I mentioned to you in our previous studies, America is still an empire. And it's hard for people to wrap their minds around, but it's an empire. And so, and as before I get into it too, we were having conversations last week about, being a patriot, and can you be a Christian and a patriot? Well, my allegiance is to God, and then it's to my people. And of course, America, you have this conflict within yourself. At times, there's parts of this country that you enjoyed, and there's other parts that need to be critiqued. Unfortunately, when you critique the country, then you're considered unpatriotic. Well, I want to remind all of you in my audience tonight that particularly African American people, we've served in every war in the United States, and even were spies. My sister Kat sent me an article on one of the performers, and her name slips me right now, but she served as a spy. And, we had people who did all kinds of things in our country, and they were never treated well by their own country, even as they served and gave of themselves. And that becomes a tragedy, becomes very tragic. Josephine Baker was in there. I couldn't think of it. Josephine Baker, she was a spy, but she was an entertainer. And she spoke French and all of that kind of stuff, but she was a spy. And she never was even recognized in her own country. So let's go to Esther. Hope you got your Bibles. Hope you got your pens. It's an exciting night. Let's be thankful. We praying for the Asian community tonight too, in terms of just the things that they shouldn't have. None of us should have to go through that, but that they experience tonight. So I'm reading from the Good News translation of the Bible that's translated from the Masoretic text. of the Old Testament. And it says, later, even after the king's anger had cooled down, he kept thinking about what Vashti had done and about his proclamation against her. And some of the king's advisors who were close to him suggested, why don't you make a search to find some beautiful young virgins? I'll stop there for a moment. Remember that Vashti has been banished. She's been silenced. She was his queen, and now he is being urged to put on a beauty pageant, basically, to find the next queen. So verse number 3, he said, you can appoint officials in every province of the empire and have them to bring all these beautiful young women to a harem here in Susa, the capital city, and put them in the care of Haggai, the eunuch who is in charge of your women, and let them be given a beauty treatment. Now, I'm going to stop here again. I'm kind of going to flow like this a little bit tonight. You understand, you're talking about going to every province. And at this time, Persia was huge. It stretched from Ethiopia and also what we call today modern day Iraq or Ethiopia. That's a really big swath of land, and you're talking about disturbing families by taking women. It's like they had a choice. It's like they had a choice. You say appoint officials in every province and have them to bring. When you're bringing somebody, it's not that they've been asked. You're bringing these young, beautiful women. And so this is the other underlying thing that's happening. Sometimes we miss when we read these texts about the families who are connected to these young women whose lives are being uprooted because the king, his appetite needs to be satisfied. All right. And then you put in care of Haggai, the eunuch who's in charge of your women, and let them be given a beauty treatment. And then verse 4, and take the young woman you like best and make her queen in Vashti's place. All right. So it's interesting. You're looking for beautiful women. Didn't say anything about whether they could think, whether they're intelligent. It treats them as if they are an object and not a subject. It's very interesting. This is this play on these positions that we have in terms of the male, the female, this intersectionality between the sexes, and you can see it being played out in this text. And then verse 5 says, there in Susa lived a Jew named Mordecai, son of Jair. He was from the tribe of Benjamin and was a descendant of Kish and Shimei. When King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon took King Joachim of Judah into exile, listen to this, into exile, along with a group of captives, Mordecai was among them. So in other words, what the writer is alerting us and helping us to see that they're in exile, and Mordecai is a part of those persons in exile. This story, if you will, because many scholars believe that it became a part of the canon, which is the Bible. This is another, scholars use the word canon, but canon just simply means the Bible, those books that made it into the 66 books. It made it in because it's an interesting story. It's almost like a novel because it's not necessarily about true characters, but it's telling a story. And there are books you can read that really don't necessarily tell they're not a history book. They could be a novel that's telling, truth about historical facts, but it's written in a novel fashion. Like I'm reading a book now called The Vanishing Half. And it's by Britt Bennett, and it's a very interesting book. And I digress for a moment here because it's talking about a town where everybody in that town, they are black folks, but they're all light skinned. And it's two sisters, Desiree and Stella, who decided they're going to leave home. And of course they did. And people thought that, that they were, they didn't know what happened to them because they went missing around age 15. And of course, Stella, she went to pass. She married a Jewish man. And of course, Desiree married a very dark-skinned man and had a child that was very dark. It's a very interesting book, but it's a story, and it's really talking about colorism in terms of even within our culture, how we as African people have been sort of enculturated to sort of have this pecking order based on the color of his skin. And now I wish, if you understand what I'm talking about, you could certainly ask me a question. But in your family, have you ever heard people say this about when a child was born? Let's look at their ears. Have you ever heard that? What color are they? Have you ever heard people say that in your family or around your friends? Wow, he is really dark, or she is really dark, or they're really light. That's colorism, where when we sort of take on this kind of enculturation that we've had in our culture because of this whole skin thing, in terms of white being so-called superior based on one's skin color. It's absolutely absurd, but it has driven so much in our culture, in America in particular. And so we see that about him. And then in verse 7, he said he had a cousin, all right, Esther, whose Hebrew name was Hadassah. Hadassah, all right? And she was a beautiful young woman and had a good figure. Listen how they describe her. She was a beautiful young woman with a good figure. It doesn't talk about whether she was smart or intelligent. It talks just a cousin, but it certainly wants you to know that she was a beautiful woman, had a good figure, and at the death of her parents, Mordecai had adopted her and brought her up as his own daughter. So in other words, she was an orphan too. It's very interesting. She was an orphan, she was Jewish, and she was a woman. She had basically 3 strikes against her. Oh yeah, old folks, yeah, that's what they do. They do talk about that color. You're right, Lorraine. And so this, as we get into this tonight, and we see Vashti in chapter 1, she is banished by King Ahasuerus, also known as King Xerxes. These are just the same person with 2 different names. That's another thing about the Bible. When you read it, sometimes you're reading about the same person, but that person may have different names. And then by her being banished, it sort of sets a framework that leaves the mark of erasure. So if you're taking notes, I would say leaves the mark of erasure. And what that means is like, you're being erased, you're being wiped out. And this erasure is based on this gender conflict rooted in hierarchy and rooted in patriarchy. The hierarchy just means there's always got to be somebody over and somebody under. All right. And most of us have been taught that way. And Dr. Kinney, who's one of my mentors, is a brilliant professor at Virginia University. And Elder Jackie knows about him too. It was just brilliant. The thing about it is that this hierarchy thing is that we always have this God that we have created. It's really incorrect. That's over us. No, but God, when you go back in the Old Testament, God was always with us. And so I don't have time to work on Dr. Kitty stuff, but he's doing this thing about the God should be in the center. So it's more circular instead of this linear thing that we have. So somebody always has to be under. Because we go back and see what we've done with the Bible, when you have this hierarchical understanding of life and the scriptures, then somebody always has to be under. So the woman is weaker than the man. She's under the man. And then the children are under the parent, all of this kind of stuff. And then as life goes on, in the church, we do the same thing. So somebody becomes a bishop and then they're over me. And not with me, but they're over me. And all of these kind of terminologies. And some people really like it because they want to be over somebody. And also this patriarchy, in terms of when you look at this text and this gender conflict, is that you have this king who's exercising his power, not because it's on equal par with Queen Vashti, but because he's a male and he's a king. And really, when you read the text back in chapter 1, he's always got to be asking his advisors to sort of help him out, give him some direction. So when we look at this, when you come along with me for tonight, this is for a little while. You know, there just interesting things about this text that really just lights me up. And because when I look at Esther, I always look at her, and I look at this book of Esther, and I look at her now, is this whole idea of a book in the Bible where God's name is not mentioned. And I think that's because God is not because God is not there, but God is sort of hidden. And the question I would ask you, and I want you to think about it, and you can respond in on your comment line, is how do you deal with a God who seems to be hidden from you? How do you deal with a God that seems to be hidden from you? How do you deal with a God that you sense is there, but doesn't necessarily um, make it easy for you to know that God is there? Think about that, because um, it seems as we're looking at this, and you can type it on your comment line. Maybe for you, maybe even during the pandemic, it seems like God is hidden. Some people are reading so much in the pandemic, they know what's on God's mind, they know what God is doing. They know this is God sent, and all kinds of stuff. People are coming. I don't dare say any of that kind of stuff, but think about that. So Esther, her this entire book is dealing with this God who seems to not be there, but God is intervening anyway. That's how it's very interesting about God. That's troubling that we often are confused about it. Something that God is always working, even when it's not apparent that we can see God, or it's not apparent that God is doing anything at all. And so the thing is, this book too, and as we get in chapter 2, it's about the questioning. It's about this gender and this ethnic identity, and this questioning the possibility of defining the us, the them, and the self, and the other, and exploring ways in which those sort of ambiguities can lead to sort of political transformation. Because you got to understand that this Esther, as she's about to enter into the scene, remember, she is an orphan. She's a Jew, and she is a woman. And then she really doesn't even tell them her name is Hadassah. She goes by Esther, right? Here's a woman who is hiding on purpose. Yeah, we don't see him now, and we know he's with us. Absolutely. Thank you so much. I'm gonna put you up on the screen so you can see what you just said. And yes, we have a God that's working behind the scenes. And you think about it. In Esther, here is this woman, and her name means to hide. Esther means to hide, to be hidden, and so in a sense, she's having this dance that she's not revealing who she is, and we're going to find that out. But this whole sort of dance now that she is sort of being perched, getting ready to perhaps take that next step, is just very interesting of how in our own culture, in this American society, that we've had to, I'm not talking about when somebody's passing, and yes, that's a part of the mix too, but when we've had to hide and be hidden in terms of hiding what we really think sometimes, so that we would not alert people to how we really think, so they wouldn't catch on to what our plans were. And I think when I think about this text tonight, I was thought about this being subversive. That Esther is about being subversive. All right, and so and listen, let me finish reading. So let me finish reading. So I think I stopped at verse 10. So on the advice of Mordecai, Esther, listen to this. Look back to verse 9 for me. Haggai liked Esther, right? And she won his favor. That's the eunuch who was in charge of her. He lost no time beginning her beauty treatment and massage and special diet. He gave her the best place in the harem and assigned her 7 young women, specially chosen for the royal palace to serve her. Think of this. She's an orphan. She's a woman, and she's Jewish, and she's in exile. But remember, she's hiding. So they don't know that she is Jewish. And she is being served. In verse 10, it says, now in the advice of Mordecai, Esther had to keep it secret that she was Jewish. And she had to keep it secret. And every day Mordecai would walk back and forth in front of the courtyard of the harem in order to find out how she was getting along and what was going to happen to her. Now, the other thing is, sometimes some people like to give Mordecai too much credit as if Esther wasn't thinking. Just because you don't read something doesn't mean it could not possibly be there. And of course, when we add stuff in, it's called the midrash. So we could think of, you think that this woman couldn't think for herself. You didn't think that she had a mind to understand what she was getting into. Yes, Mordecai was a part of the picture, but sometimes some people make him central and sort of leave Esther out as if she's just playing the standard role of a woman in this cultural context. And that could be argued because some people would say that. And so as we come along in this text, we begin to see some very interesting things that are starting to happen about just this whole identity. In Esther's a story, it's about identity because at one point she's really a Jewish woman who's sort of pretending that she's Persian in the diaspora. And these stories, as I mentioned earlier, always sort of come out of these exilic experiences, exile. Think about the Ma'afa. Think about the Middle Passage. Think about slavery coming out of those stories. We're still sort of in it, but you think about the slave narratives. You think about the stories you heard from your grandmother, your grandfather while you was growing up. Good to see you, Brenda Perry. Think about, when you were, experiencing something, or you went to a family reunion and they told you a story about what happened to your ancestors and how some of them had to get away from enslavers, or they found themselves in difficult situations. And so, in same thing with African people, we have stories that have come out of this the Middle Passage. We also call it the Ma'afa, which means the great disaster at the hands of Europeans. It's like the African Holocaust, right? And so when people are dispersed, it just means diaspora. That means people are everywhere. And of course, African people went all throughout the Americas and the Caribbean. So they're not just here in what we call the United States, but Canada and also South America. There's probably more Africans that went to South America than actually North America. And then the Caribbeans. So all over the place. And that means we have African people of African descent. They're in a diaspora. That means they are been dispersed. Just like in this case, these Jewish people had been brutalized. They had been dispersed. And now they're trying to find their way out. They're trying to get out of the situation. And here they have Esther, who's sort of being put in place in sort of a subversive role, so that she can perhaps, we haven't even got to where she's going to be dealing with the king, but she's being put in place to make something happen. And that's often the challenging thing about when you are in exile, when you find yourself in an oppressive situation, is to be subversive. And I've often said that sometimes when you find yourself in an empire and we're not powerless, and you're not powerless. But sometimes we believe that. And sometimes when you are in the position where you are being dominated or oppressed, you have to use strategy and be strategic. And you can't tell people everything. If you go back and read about some of our ancestors' history, when the masters would say certain things, a lot of times they would go along and they would agree with it verbally. But in their soul, in their spirit, they were not agreeing at all. They were thinking and they were plotting about how they could get away, how they could, disturb where they were, those kind of things. Now, listen to this. I think the thing about Esther too is it's just very interesting. The book of Esther is about power. It's about the powerlessness. It is about how people, more specifically women in a subordinate position, nonetheless can exercise power. And of course, one of my resources is called Esther Subverting The Capable Wife by David J. Zucker. Now, the thing is, when you think about this, women were put in a position where they were seen as less than a man, and sometimes, in some cases, probably less than human. And so they had to they had to deal with some adverse situations. But also, when we think about the eunuchs, and particularly in this case, in our text, the eunuch that was handling them, Haggai, back in verse number 3, because he was in charge of all of the king's women, the text says. And think about him as a eunuch. He also was being oppressed. He was also considered sort of an other person, because when he left, or when he left his work, if you will, usually eunuchs lived in colonies. And also, if you go read the book of Deuteronomy, they weren't even allowed in the temple. So not only were they oppressed by the people who they were working for at this time, the Persians, but even the Hebrew people, in terms of their own scriptures and their understanding, they also oppressed them. So let me park here parenthetically just for a moment. It's interesting sometimes how the church can be an oppressive institution, as well as what we call the secular world. And because of the way we read text, the way we think we understand God, the way we decide who's in and who's out, and that's why the church becomes almost toxic in people who are outside of the church, who we want to be a part of our faith tradition, or part of understanding a God who's loving, a God who's caring, yes, a God of judgment too, but a God who cares. We're so busy trying to tell people about their sins and about how they need to straighten up, and all the things we know. We have a list of sins, and then of course the things that we sort of have conquered, we're cool with them now. We don't deal with all of the stuff in the scriptures. And so the thing is how do you love God? And if you really love God, you have to love people, and stop saying, I love them, but no, just love them, period. Why you got to put the but in there? Just love them, period. So the other thing is, there's a writer, his name is Timothy K. Beale, and it's somebody you should pick up. Timothy K. Beale, and I'll give you his book. His book is entitled The Hiding: Gender, Ethnicity, Alienation, and Esther. The Book of Hiding by Timothy K. Beale. All right, it's a very interesting writer, and I think you should check him out. So the thing is, when you know that Esther, her name means, hiding, and we know we're dealing with this identification, and this in sort of, Esther 2 is a book, it's a game of self-identification or self-definition, and it's played out over against women as other. And it's also played out as Jew as other as well, because remember, they're in the Persian Empire. They're in exile. Matter of fact, they're being oppressed. And so they're considered the other in this particular situation. And it helps us to think about how we can start to deal with our own situations, and particularly as Africans living in America. I know some of you may still call yourselves colored, and now they're using the term people of color because they can't just come around. They can't say, they gave us these labels, black, and so now we want to be called African Americans. Then they want to go back to calling people of color. So I guess that I guess they're not. I guess white is not a color. So I'm sometimes trying to figure out what does all that mean. So the thing is, when you start to understand that as we read this text, Esther is being set up. She is. It may seem like she's just getting along to get along, because she's a beautiful woman. She has a good figure, but somehow she has won the favor of a eunuch who's also oppressed. Very interesting sometimes how oppressed people, if they work together, can end up helping each other, or sometimes oppressed people end up hurting each other. But he's a eunuch. He's also considered the other outside of society. And so as we go through this text, particularly as we go through and understand we'll start to get a grasp on how we can take an example from Esther. Now, the last thing I want to say before I let you go, I'm running over my time for about 5 minutes. Now, listen to this. She was a subversive. To be a subversive means tending to subvert or overthrow, destroy, or undermine an established or existing system, especially a legal constituted government or set of beliefs. So subversive, it kind of comes from this Latin word sub, which is meaning underneath, with the remainder of the word coming from a Latin verte, which means to turn. So think about a subversive as a hidden kind of revolutionary who tries to turn the system from underneath. And that can happen through art or literature, because art or literature or writing or can be subversive to preaching, can be subversive. Christianity, if it's conscious in the empire, can be what? Subversive, because it means you're coming underneath something, that you're kind of trying to go undetected. So I want you to think about that tonight as we look at Esther more next week, and try to read the rest of chapter 2, and then we'll go on to chapter 3, and then again the story gets a little more juicier. But just think about, these different roles that she's going to have to play, and think about the roles we've had to play and your ancestors in order to navigate our way in this empire. Listen, I want to thank you all for joining me tonight. And if you so desire to contribute anything to our ministry, we would certainly appreciate it. You can give through Givelify, you can give through Cash App, any one of those kind of things. You can go online and you can go to our website and you can give. Listen, I ask everybody, I know you can give at least $5 to support our ministry. We do wonderful work in the community, Bennett Terrace area, and there are plenty needs there. And even though we're virtual here in our services and Bible study, but we're in the community doing various things. So go tonight, after you get off or while or go to the Cash App. It's right there, the information, or go to our website and give through Givelify. And all of your gifts are tax deductible. I'm not asking you for no specific amount, but most of you can give $5 or $10, $10. It's not going to break your piggy bank to support our ministry. And if you can't, that's not a problem. Just thank you for whatever you can do to help us. I want to thank you all for joining. Good to see you, Brenda, for all of you joining us tonight. And I pray that you would continue to pray for the village. I'm going to pray before you go. And as we pray tonight, we also just want to continue to pray for each other, pray for our community, our country, and yes, pray for the world, because the world is much smaller than it used to be because of technology. So God, we thank you for the opportunity you've given us to share tonight. We pray tonight, especially for the Asian community in Georgia, but all across this country, because they have really been put under it by just the kind of incendiary things the past president was saying and just stoking people. We also pray, God, for just people in general, poor whites and poor African Americans and poor Latinos, and even just poor people who are struggling, and people don't seem to care. We have politicians who have lost all their sense and sensibility because they're living a lifestyle that does not equate to the people that they actually have to serve or supposed to be serving. So they don't relate. And God, I pray that you would help them to see and help us to be the kinds of persons that love and care and do the things that we can do, and then leave the rest to you. This is my prayer in your son Yeshua's name. Amen. All right. Take care. Hopefully I see y'all on Sunday. God bless. Love you all.